It was one of those cold winter nights when the city looked asleep. Cars rushed by, lights blurred in the fog, and not a single person stopped to notice the man sitting quietly under the bridge. He had a thin blanket wrapped around his shoulders and a cardboard sign resting beside him that said, "Still human." His name was Eddie Harper. Once a construction worker, a husband, a father, but life has a way of testing people. And Eddie had lost everything: his job, his family, and his home, all within one cruel year. That night, the wind cut through his torn jacket like knives. He shivered, pulling his blanket tighter, and whispered to himself, "Just one more night, Eddie. One more night." He reached for the small paper bag beside him, half a sandwich he had saved from the shelter. But before he could take a bite, he heard a sound, soft whimpers, coming from the dark alley behind him. He looked up and saw two glowing eyes staring at him. A dog, thin, wet, trembling, and hungry. Eddie smiled faintly. "Hey there, buddy. You lost too, huh?" The dog stepped closer, tail tucked, body shaking from the cold. Eddie tore his sandwich in half and placed a piece near the dog. His greater than, "Here, I don't have much, but I guess we both could use a little hope tonight." The dog sniffed it, looked up at him once, and slowly began to eat. That night, Eddie slept lighter than usual, not because it was warmer, but because, for the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. Over the next few days, the dog kept coming back. Each morning, Eddie would save a small part of his meal, and each night, the dog would find him under the same bridge. He began calling him Buddy. Buddy was scruffy, brown, and had eyes that spoke louder than words. Eyes that had seen hunger, fear, and maybe even betrayal. And somehow, Eddie understood, because he'd seen the same things. They became inseparable. If Eddie walked to the soup kitchen, Buddy followed. If Eddie sat quietly by the street corner with his old cardboard sign, Buddy lay beside his feet, tail wagging gently every time someone passed. Some people gave coins, some gave food, most just walked past. But whenever someone smiled, Eddie noticed they smiled not at him, but at Buddy. "You're the reason people even see me anymore," Eddie would whisper, scratching behind Buddy's ears. "Guess that makes you my guardian angel, huh?" Weeks passed. The cold began to fade, and spring touched the city. Eddie started feeling lighter. He began talking again, not just to Buddy, but to strangers. He even found a small job at a nearby mechanic shop, cleaning floors and tools. The first paycheck he got, he didn't buy food for himself. He bought a collar for Buddy. It wasn't fancy, just a simple red one, with a tag that said, Buddy Harper. That night, sitting under the bridge, Eddie held the tag in his palm and whispered, "Your family now." Buddy barked once, as if he understood everywhere. But life, as always, wasn't done testing Eddie yet. One evening, the skies turned dark. A thunderstorm rolled in heavy rain, cold wind, and lightning flashing across the bridge. Eddie and Buddy huddled under a piece of tarp, trying to stay dry. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed. A car had lost control near the bridge, hitting the guardrail hard. Without thinking, Eddie ran out into the rain. The car was smoking, a young woman trapped inside, crying for help. He shouted for help, but the street was empty. He pulled at the door with all his strength. It wouldn't budge. Then, as if sensing his fear, Buddy began barking loudly. His barks echoed through the storm, echoing across the street. Within minutes, headlights appeared. Another driver had heard the barking and stopped. Together, they managed to pull the woman out just before the car caught fire. Eddie collapsed on the road, soaked and exhausted. Buddy, licking his hands as if to say, "You did it." The woman, shivering, whispered, "You saved my life. Both of you." Days later, Eddie woke up in a hospital bed. The woman, her name was Laura, had covered all his medical bills. When she came to visit, she smiled warmly. "You didn't even know me, yet you risked your life. Why?" Eddie looked at Buddy sitting beside the bed and said, Because someone taught me that kindness doesn't need a reason. Laura nodded, eyes wet. Well, you and your friend here deserve more than a bridge. And, true to her word, a week later, Eddie and Buddy moved into a small apartment Laura helped arrange. She even offered him a part-time job at her small printing shop. For the first time in years, Eddie slept on a real bed. Buddy curled beside him, snoring softly. And for the first time, Eddie didn't whisper, "Just one more night." Instead, he said, "We made it, Buddy." A year passed. Eddie had clean clothes, steady work, and a warm home. He and Buddy became local favorites customers at Laura's shop, always stopped to pet him. One afternoon, a little boy asked, "Mister, is that your dog?" Eddie smiled. "No, kid, he's my friend." He paused, then added, "When you have nothing, and someone still stays, that's not a pet. That's family." Years later, when Buddy grew old and tired, Eddie knew the time was near. He sat beside him, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You came to me when I was nothing, Buddy. You stayed when no one else did. You saved me not from the cold, but from giving up." Buddy licked his hand one last time and closed his eyes peacefully. After his passing, Eddie took the small red collar and placed it in a wooden box. He wrote on the lid, "Is greater than the dog that stayed." Eddie still walks by the bridge sometimes. He sits quietly, handing out sandwiches to the homeless. And whenever someone asks why, he just smiles and says, "Because someone once shared theirs with me." Dear friends, kindness doesn't cost anything, but it can save a life. When you give love without expecting, it finds its way back to you in ways you can't imagine.